Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Thinking Stack. Earlier I covered a section on how we can be using React Router for setting up my React application. In that video, I covered how to do a basic setup of your route pages and how you can navigate between two different pages. Along with that, framework mode of React Router gives us an option on how we can implement different types of routing. Today, in this video, I want to cover the different ways I can implement routing of different pages in my React Router application. With framework mode, React Router gives me multiple options to render my pages. The first one of them being the index page. That would be the default page that would render on our application. Second is the layout, where you want to have a general layout of your page and different pages get rendered in your application. You can take the example of a navigation bar, which will be a common bar for the rest of your application. So in this scenario, you'll have a navigation bar that would be rendered in a layout component, and rest of the elements or the components get rendered accordingly, whatever page you get land to. Then we have a prefix. This is used if I want to add a prefix in my route. That is, let's say if my application is running on abc.com, and before going to the dashboard of my admin panel, I want to add admin123. So that the URL becomes abc.com/admin123 and then login for the admin page. So all the components or the application that gets rendered will come after the prefix that I want to add in this route. Then the other option that we have is of nested routes, where I want to render different components under a particular component. It might be confusing with the layout component, but it's not. It serves a different purpose. I'll explain while showing you the demo. Then we have dynamic segments. With dynamic segments, there are two parts. One is the dynamic route param that we have in our endpoint. So to explain for people who don't know what route params are, route param is a segment in your URL that is dynamic in nature, and it would change for every unique element or a unique identity of your application. Let's take the example of LinkedIn. So when we are visiting anyone's profile, there we see a username for every user, right? So that username is usually the dynamic part of that URL, and it acts as a route param in that URL. Then the next option of dynamic segments is the optional parameters that we usually refer as query params. Query params you would see in a URL with that comes after question mark. Now let's jump into the demo part. I have run my React Router server. It's a similar code that you would have seen in my previous video. I linked the previous video in the eye icon. You can find it. So right now, if you see, I'm on the localhost 5173, but nothing is getting rendered. Why? Because I don't have an index route. That means I don't have a page that should get rendered by default. So just to do that, let's do index and let's render something from this routes file. Let's try rendering login.tsx. So let's correct the path here. So the path would be routes slash, and since this exports an array, so let's add a comma. Let's save it. So you see now the default page becomes the index page that is rendering the login page for me. So now let's go to the nested routes. So this is not in the same sequence I told you about uh, earlier, the different ways we can implement routing. So, but I'll cover all of them. So this is example for this routes is an example for nested routes. If I go to localhost / home, so my default page that should get loaded is component / dashboard and dashboard.tsx. So this is again the component that I have referred, this one. In this, it's just my dashboard because now I have home page as well. I have mentioned here another component that is route / home.tsx. So if I go here, so it's just nothing but a component that gives me a piece of another routing elements to be where I can have different set of routes under this particular component. So it just says my home page and we have this. And if we go back to our routes and see, I have another route here, welcome. So if I need to go to welcome, it would be like /welcome. So this becomes the welcome page. So the component that is rendered here is component /welcome .welcome.tsx, which is just rendering a div of welcome page. Now let's come to the layout example. Let me comment out why I have commented this out. I'll show you before telling why I have commented. So just wait until I come to that point. Let's add a comma here and save. Okay, so this layout means I want to render route / marketing.tsx as the main component, and inside this I want to have different other routes. So let's see what's in my route / marketing.tsx. It's just nothing else but an outlet that again lets me render other different routes within this component, within this page or a component, parent component. So I'll be seeing a h1 tag with marketing and other set of components that depending on the route that I'll go to. I don't have an index because this does not have a slug to reach to. So to show this, to access this particular component, my URL would be directly localhost / marketing home. So if I just go here and change it to marketing home. So you see this, I get the marketing and the marketing homepage content. So this marketing homepage content comes from this particular component under components marketing and marketing home, where I'm just saying marketing homepage. I hope now you have understood the difference between nested routes and the layout routes. So to put it for someone who has not understood it, nested routes are for the URLs where I want to have intermediate slug in my URL, but I would be using layout option where I don't want to tell which is my parent component and or an intermediate slug that I want to have. So by this example, I hope it is pretty clear now, and it would make more sense like why we need both nested and layout options. Now let's uncomment this and get out of the mystery that we have. So let me save this, and still we are on marketing contact. For this prefix, it means I don't want to render a particular component as a main component, but I want to have a slug in my URL. So this slug is marketing. So let's go. And for this, the index, I have specified the index. So if I just go and say marketing, so it says, just to ensure my spelling is correct, let's see. So I've copied this and I'll find it here. So it says I have that marketing, but it says page is not found. Why is that? Any guesses? If you know, please drop it in the comments. If you don't know, then I'll show you why this is happening like this. So when I compiled it, so let's dig a little deeper and let's go to this React router and types. So if I go in this routes, so here it has specified there is no page for marketing. Why? So again, these were the types. This is the route files. Now they have strictly mapped with the page and the components it wants to render and what's the ID. Since it is identifying the components and it's a one-to-one mapping, it won't map two different components or pages to the same endpoint. That is why in my routes.tsx, I had this as commented so that I can use the same components for two different options of displaying my routes. Okay. I hope this would be helpful because this wasn't mentioned anywhere in the documents. This was something I learned when I was implementing this. So let's comment this out and test the prefixes. I'll save this and my server has changed. So if you see, I was already on marketing and it has loaded the marketing homepage because I am loading marketing/marketing home.tsx. And if I go to marketing/contact, I should go to contact page. Good, cool enough. Now the last one, that is the dynamic elements. So if you see, this is user and this is the route param, which is identified with a colon after it. So this name I would need to pick up in this particular component. So let's see how we pick it up. But before going there, let's see how this works. So people who have already identified this, how this works, can slide a little ahead. But who are coming or understanding this routing for the first time, they can stick around. So let me add user/Rajat and this says loading. And after some time, it says user1 and Rajat. Okay. So let's go and see what's happening and how I got loading there. So it is route/Rajat. So this is my component that is getting rendered here, user, and then an ID and a name. Okay. And I see something as Hydrate fallback. Now what is it? So Hydrate fallback is a mechanism to load the loading screen until your API gives you a response. So if you've seen any platform, so there are APIs getting hit to fetch the data for you. Until those APIs respond back, for slow websites, you'll see this pretty often. They load up a spinner or they'll show any other moving images. That is a loading screen for you. And React Router gives us an option to implement this using Hydrate fallback. We do have it in React also, but React Router DOM, but it's implemented differently. Okay, cool. Now the other part, how this was getting loaded initially. So if I just refresh it, so it again says loading and then shows me the user. So I have a client loader. So what is a client loader? So it loads the information on my client side. Client side is the browser that we run our application on. So here, to mimic the API, I've just created a promise that resolves after 2 seconds and returns me an ID and the params.name. So from where am I getting that name? I passed it in my URL, but here in client loader, I have that params. So within that params, I can find name. And in the API, because it's a promise, I put up a wait and then I log it and then return the API response. Once I get the API response, the React router will automatically change the content of this page from Hydrate fallback component to the component that I want to load for this page. And since this client loader comes into picture before this page, this user component actually loads. So the data is passed as props to your component. That is called as loader data. So this loader data will have the data that you return from this client loader. That is how I have the ID and name and I get to display it. Cool. What I have left out of this video is the query params. I hope you can read through the documentations and implement it. If you cannot, do let me know in the comments. I'll create a very short video for this and tag it, or I'll create a blog around it. If you have reached this point, I hope it was helpful. Let's catch up in our next video.